Man, most of these kids were way more creative than I was. Except, of course, for the kid whose if was a glass of water. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2024 fantasy comedy, If. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. If stars Cailey, Fleming, Ryan Reynolds, and Steve Carell, and was directed by John Krasinski. It tells the story of a young girl who discovers that she can see forgotten imaginary friends, and along with her neighbor, embarks on a mission to unite these abandoned ifs with kids. Imagination is a powerful thing. It provides us with entertainment, it gives us comfort and an escape when used as a coping mechanism, and it really lets us tap into our creativity. Imagination is often associated with childhood and the idea of make-believe, but it's something for adults too, a concept that this film tries to convey and capitalize on. If, short for Imaginary Friend, is a film that's predicated on the idea that almost every kid has an imaginary friend at some point during their childhood. And so there's a lot of variety to the imaginary friends in this film. Interesting designs and different personalities and purposes to match the kids that imagined them. And I've gotta say, it makes me realize how not creative I was as a kid. I was an only child, so I definitely had imaginary friends, but not like this. I never created an imaginary friend. I would steal them, or co-opt them. Basically, my imaginary friends were movie characters, usually animated. After watching a movie I connected with, I would imagine the characters coming home with me, and we would go on adventures, and they would help me get through stuff. Sometimes they would only be my ifs for a couple days, while other characters I would repeatedly return to. The bugs from James and the Giant Peach were a childhood mainstay for me for whatever reason. So I had a fairly robust set of ifs when I was a kid, but they never truly felt like my own, because I didn't actually make them up. I just expanded upon something somebody else created. But even for me and my stolen imaginary friends, this movie was able to tap into something, this sort of imagination-fueled nostalgia. If is a film that boasts a strong initial premise. It's not exactly an original premise. I mean, there's no way that this wasn't inspired by Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, a show about an orphanage for abandoned imaginary friends that featured a main character named Blue. But even with the similar concept, there was a lot of potential. And there's definitely some fun to be had here with the concept, but the plot and the way the story unfolds is surprisingly underwhelming. The story starts off with an okay plot that is going in a certain direction, but then about 2/3 of the way through the movie, the plot direction suddenly shifts. The new plot focus isn't bad or anything, but it just feels like a random change in direction for no story reason. And that's sort of a trend with this movie. There are a lot of little story threads that feel like they're there just for the sake of being there. There's not really much of an overarching story arc here, and all of the fairly predictable twists and turns we go on with this story spit us out pretty close to where we started. There are kernels of interesting and fun world building here, but that aspect of the film is kinda lacking, which is a shame given the imaginative potential of the concept. It's not a bad story or a bad movie, it's just disappointingly undercooked. With its okay but not great story execution, If is a movie that leans into and heavily relies on emotion in order to connect with the audience. This approach is sort of effective occasionally, but it offers up a weird tonal mix overall. In the pre-movie featurette, Ryan Reynolds mentions that they were kind of aiming for a live-action Pixar feel with If, a fantastical but very emotional story that appeals to both kids and adults. The pieces for that are mostly there, but this movie doesn't quite get the tonal balance right, so the intended target audience is a bit unclear. There's some slapstick and goofy stuff that's clearly aimed at kids, and the character of Blue has next to no appeal as an adult, but large chunks of this movie are also soaked in nostalgia, which is something a young kid just doesn't have the life experience to comprehend. There's also some dark and sad stuff in here, as well as attempts at poignancy, so it's just a weird mix. Stretches of this movie are going to be boring to kids, and the more kiddie aspects and jokes are going to be irritating to adults. And unfortunately, the movie rarely finds a good balance for appealing to both groups at the same time. If is a very sweet film, cloyingly saccharine at times, and often tugging at heartstrings in a very weepy way. I'll admit that I did tear up a bit, and people in my screening were sniffling and blowing their noses during the credits, but I'm not sure the film really earned that. I think it was mostly our own nostalgia that contributed to the emotion. If is the type of movie that feels like a big budget passion project. The type of film that clearly originated from a very personal place, but never quite comes together. There are plenty of things to like about this movie. Cailey, Fleming, and Reynolds are both solid in their roles. The A-list voice cast for the Ifs is impressively expansive, and the design and integration of the CG characters into the real world is decent. It's a movie with some nice themes and some effective moments, but it's also missing that spark of magic that you can tell the film clearly thinks it has. It's close, but the story and world building are just a little too underdeveloped. Maybe it's a movie that works better for people who had their own imaginary friends, ones that they actually created. Maybe the power of imagination and nostalgia is enough to provide the story with that much needed spark of magic. But for me, it just wasn't there. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The biggest pro is the film's sense of nostalgia. This is a movie that actually depends on nostalgia. It's rooted in childhood creativity and imagination, and relies on us to provide the kindling for the emotional fire it hopes to spark. It does lean a bit heavily into this, and gets a little cloying as a result, but I do think it's effective. It gives something for adult audiences to latch onto. At the very least, I think this is a movie that'll make people remember and think about their own childhood imaginary friends, and the nostalgic comfort that comes along with them. On the con side, the biggest issue is the story. This is a movie that has a strong premise. There's a lot of creative potential that could have come from this concept, but the movie just doesn't do much with it. It's not that the plot we do get is bad or anything, it's just underdeveloped. Things feel like they happen just for the sake of it, rather than to drive the story or character arcs forward. We're taken on this predictable ride, only to get off right next to where we started. It also doesn't help that the world building is lacking. It sets up a lot of interesting ideas, but then doesn't follow through with many of them. The second con is the tonal balance. This is an aspect that I was really rooting for. I was hoping they were gonna nail it, because there's a lot of potential there with the imagination and nostalgia. The pre-movie featurette mentioned that they were going for a live-action Pixar feel, but it never quite comes together in the right way. There are sporadic moments and characters that'll appeal to kids. There are nostalgic elements and themes that'll appeal to adults, but not that many moments that work for both at the same time. Instead, they almost work against each other. Some of the slapstick humor and characters, like Blue, are going to be too kiddie and annoying to adults, while the nostalgia-based elements alternate between being too sad or too boring for kids. So it's a movie that struggles to find its place with either demographic. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying If or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give If 3 out of 5 paws. It suffers from an undercooked story and an odd tonal balance, but if you can power through the saccharine emotionality, this film offers a sentimental and nostalgic tale of childhood and imagination. I would recommend If to people interested in a very sweet family fantasy. It's cloyingly saccharine at times and won't fully appeal to either kids or adults, but it's a solid imagination-driven story with equal parts laughs and tears. I think most people will be able to find something enjoyable about this movie, but it's probably one that's best for those who fondly remember their own imaginary friend. If you liked If, I would recommend James and the Giant Peach. This is another fantasy adventure that blends reality with imagination, not only in terms of the story, but also in its mix of live action and stop-motion animation. It tells the story of a boy in a very difficult situation, who befriends a group of unique individuals who may or may not actually exist. If you'd like another story about an imaginary friend, you might want to watch Harvey. This film actually makes a brief appearance in If, and it's definitely fitting, because it tells the story of a man, played by Jimmy Stewart, who is friends with a 6-foot-tall rabbit that only he can see and hear, which leads to an assortment of comedic, dramatic, and poignant story beats. And if you're yearning for that Pixar feeling If was trying to achieve, you should check out Inside Out. Not only does the story feature an imaginary friend and excellent world building, but it's also a movie that greatly appeals to both kids and adults. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen If? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, did you have an imaginary friend? What was it? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.